You don't remember?
I do. I met you so many times.
Yes.
I don't know
just backstage a few minutes ago.
What the first one was.
But first you emailed me a copy of Sorry to Bother You, like, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago.
Yeah, of the script.
Of the script, yes, the script, yes. And I read it and was like, great. I don't know how that's going to happen, but good luck, sir. It was so ambitious, and it stayed that ambitious. But I also know that you've just gone through this whole process of the film coming out. It's now out on all digital platforms and DVD and Blu-ray. You can get it, everybody. I'll do your commercial. Where are you at now? Like, how are you? You know what I mean?
Well, being someone that has done art independently, let's say, for a long time, 20-something years, I'm so used to the promotion part of it, that so much about it is you've made this thing, which took a lot to figure out how to carve out the time to survive and make it, that you then have to get it out to the world. So most, like with Coup albums, there was always years between albums, and a lot of that was just me promoting that album, like getting out on the road, people hearing about it a little bit at a time, because we didn't always have like the big machine behind it. So I'm used to doing what I'm doing now, which is going around letting folks know that the movie exists. Because for many of us, and maybe many of you, it seems like everybody knows about this film, because that's how social media tricks you. It makes you think that everybody's thinking the same thing you are, or depending on what you like to hang around with, that everybody's thinking the opposite of you. But my life is promoting this movie right now and trying to figure out how to carve out time to write new stuff.
So I think the other thing I'm even getting to is, like, there's this, I think the weird thing that happens when people think you've hit it or you've made it, when success has come, especially when people feel like you finally made it when they wanted to. Sometimes there's a perception that they see you, because they do think the movie is everywhere and it's doing, that you're doing better than you are. You know what I mean? Like, sort of the disconnect of, like, how you actually still are an artist who's trying to.
Well, I think having, been, like, within the last recent years, been perpetually 10 months behind on the rent, and having throughout my career periods of time where the lights are cut off and I'm still doing that, yes, I'm doing better than that. Much, better than that. But it's just because people just assume that someone that produces art and puts it out there is, surviving. But the real thing is that the only way I could make the art that I've made for 20-something years was to be, irresponsible. Like, I should have gotten a job, maybe, right? Like, and most people will be like, wow, I've got kids, I'm putting them in danger, I should no longer be an artist, right? And that's the thing that most people, come up against, right? Like, just trying to survive. So, I've been hearing, like, this dichotomy of, like, when we talk about artist housing, whether it should be supporting artists or supporting families. Well, many of those families are people that would be artists had they had the support or the ability to spend the time on it. And, I know, I'm not even going to call her out because she might be here, but there's a girl in the early 90s that I would go around saying was the best rapper in the Bay Area. She now has kids and a job, and is probably not the best rapper in the Bay Area anymore because she doesn't get to practice that. And, so when we're talking about trying to support women in the arts or people of color in the arts, it comes down to, things like that, like housing. Like, as opposed to affordable artist housing, why not have low-income artist housing, Like most of the culture, and I've toured around the world, and the culture that, for instance, people know of the Bay Area are not the ones that's mostly funded, that has, it's not the painters who are in the galleries or anything like that. It's people like Tupac, Sly and the Family Stone, all these folks that come from these neighborhoods where they might have been the only, like, it's like you're fighting to just carve out the time to work on your art. And where there were maybe other people that might have even been better. There definitely were people that were better than me. And I just, because I also, the other part of it is that I had a particular I had movements that I wanted to connect my art with, so I felt like the being irresponsible with finances and just doing this, that I had something else, some other reason to do it, so I could justify that. But maybe other folks that haven't been involved in a movement that would become amazing artists, that would be known around the world, they're not being supported in those ways, so yes, I myself am doing better than I was, because I was doing a lot worse than most people would have thought, for
Say that
a couple
again.
decades.
I think people see you, like, and I've had them too, if they see your poster up everywhere, they think you're doing well. When you're like, no, I'm $500 in the hole because my poster's up everywhere. And I had to pay a guy to hang them because the coffee shops wouldn't trust me to hang them, so I had to pay the poster guy to hang them up. He was a great guy. He lives in Oakland. I think, and what you're talking about when you say Tupac and Sly and the Family Stone, and I as a comedian, I can speak to this, it's about, a lot, one of this is about how we define what is art. And I can say, as a stand-up comedian, that's not defined as art. It's not defined as one of the higher art forms, even though it is one of America's original art forms, right up there with jazz and hip hop. And I like that we're doing some of that. I appreciate that. But in the same way as hip hop is not necessarily defined as art, there's not a lot of talk of the people, like, of funders who have the money funding the up and coming hip hop artists. Well,
and the reason why is this is, and I can't speak necessarily for comedians, but the connection to the art there's always this connection to art from people of color that happened 20-something years ago. That's different than the connection to art from people of color that's happening now. So, for instance, just recently I think they had a Tupac statue at the Oakland Museum, where 20 years ago, almost exactly 20 years ago, the city of Oakland would not let Tupac have a concert here, right? And there are examples of this sort of thing around the country. Now, here's the thing, is that the music from 20-something years ago is always, no matter what year you can be in the 50s and you can put this to that. The music of 20-something years ago of people of color is usually something that's supposed to represent a time when people of color weren't so wild, when people of color had their families together more, when people of color when the art of people of color was supposedly more artistic or more intellectual or more emotion filled. This is what they were saying in the 60s about the blues. This is what they were saying, saying that the blues was in Oakland they had a ban, according to John Handy, they had a ban on the blues in Oakland, saying that it caused, in the 60s, saying that it caused stabbings and people being killed, and so they had a ban on the blues. 20 years after that, it was the music that was brought up, like, about hip hop. Why can't hip hop be more like that, right? And the same thing goes for, like, swing music into rock and roll, when it was black. All of those things are about this idea that the culture that the culture of people of color 20 years ago was better, and what that says is that the problems that people are having in their communities have to do with culture, as opposed to the real thing is that they have to do with the system the economic system that we're in, right? So there's this idea that people of color are savage or all these things, and you can point to the culture, and therefore that shows you why people are impoverished. So there's this idea of the culture of poverty that is causing the poverty, and you point to the current music, the current culture, as the example of that. But in reality, we know that capitalism must have a certain amount of unemployed people to exist. Like, you can't have full employment under capitalism, because then everyone could demand whatever wages they want. And people like Wall Street Journal, things like that, they openly worry about it when the unemployment rate goes too low, because then wages go up and stocks go down. But it's better to not explain poverty as a built-in part of capitalism, and to instead explain poverty as the fault of the impoverished. And the way to do that is to blame it on the culture of the impoverished, to show that. And so there's always a disconnect. So all this stuff, like, personally, like, I don't like some of this, Gucci gang, I don't know. But that's just me, it didn't come out when I was in high school, so that's why.
I love the fact that some people don't realize you're literally quoting a song. Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang.
However, 20 years from now, it will be the thing that's way more artistic than whatever people of color are doing then.
If only we could get back to mumble rap. That was when black people really were keeping their families together.
And there's all these things that were, when people were, like, when people used to break dance in the 80s, they would do that instead of fighting, things like that. And so then what ends up happening is that whatever art we're doing right now is the one that you're not supposed to be supporting, right? And we support forms that are still valid. However, they are not the ones that most people are connecting with, and we get this kind of sort of attitude about it. And I think, like, definitely what I do musically is not considered like what's happening exactly right now or whatever. And I never was on top of whatever was happening right then. I never could do that. So, our music stays evergreen. But the thing is that, we got to look at what it is that we are railing against and why we're railing against it, and how to support that art, and how to support those communities that are happening right there. There was, I don't live in the Lower Bottoms now. Lower Bottoms is an area in West Oakland, but at a time when I used to live there, there were other, there was a black cultural organization that came in, and they were very concerned with making sure there were drum circles and certain kinds of events that were happening in that neighborhood, and eschewing, and to a certain extent, and I'm talking about one particular organization, putting a criminal identity on people standing around their car with the music playing loud, which really is a drum circle, and is community, is people standing out there, and then we have these sort of ideas about, oh, there's a lot of people standing on the corner, a lot of black folks standing on the corner, they must be up to no good. Let's figure out how we can change this into this other thing that we identify as real culture or as real art. And I think, you know, there are ways to support some of the stuff that exists while also opening people up to drum circles, to, you know, different kinds of dance and things like that. But anyway, I don't even remember how I got on this right now.
Well, I mean, we're here talking to people who connect people to funders or are funders themselves, and I feel like just to sort of take it back to the idea that it seems like, and Fabiana made this point very well, which is why when she walked off stage, it felt like we were all done. It felt like it's over now. You know, she did such an effective job. Why would we need two people to talk about it some more? Shout out to Fabi. So the idea that people who fund art want to fund art that has either been classified as intellectual.
And you know what? I don't know the stats on that. It's just my personal limited experience, because maybe everybody coming to this conference, I'm preaching to the choir about that, because they're looking to fund things in a different way.
Even if you're preaching to the choir, they need to be able to, it's better if they quote you saying it than if they just say it themselves. That's how that works, I find. Then they don't sound like it's just their opinion. They go, another person said, and he directed a movie. So continue.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I wouldn't have been able to make that movie were it not for me finding out about the grant from SF Film, which was through the Rainin Society. Like, I would have been doing art, but a lot of times with the other side of trying to survive while doing music, it takes away from the creation part. So we're on constantly on tour. You know, if you're making pennies, you got to collect a lot of them. And so, you know, in order to make this movie happen, I needed to be able to stay put and work on it. And I just so happened to meet somebody who was like, hey, you know about SF Film, Filmmaker in Residence program, then went over there, got into that, and then found out about the grants through that. But it was just, even for me, that people would have thought was more plugged in, it was, you know, almost by accident, you know, that I came into those series of events that led me to that. And so I think, you know, I think a big, to try to, if we want to get more people of color involved in being able to make arts, and we're doing that through grants, there are just some regular standard of living things that could be funded. There could be low-income artist housing. There could be daycare for artists, you know, that open up some space for, you know, women who have kids who are artists that are now, you know, are now only able to do certain things because they're by themselves with kids, or whatever, or men that would normally quit doing.
I mean, I was just talking to our friend Nato Green yesterday about this, and we were talking about the idea of doing a New Year's show, and we both have kids, and I was like, I'm not doing a show where I have to be on stage at midnight on New Year's Eve. I'm not doing that because I'm too old and I got too many children for that. And I was like, but we can do an 8 o'clock show, and eventually we're like, how about a 4 o'clock show? The idea being that we have to reconceive how all of this works so that it supports not only the artists, but the audience who the artists are attracting.
Yeah.
You know, and there's like 4 o'clock show with a daycare, and suddenly, but there's nothing in place for that because we haven't expanded the idea of how art should be getting to the world and how art should be created. And until we, and I mean you, expand that idea, we're giving you these ideas for free, basically. So you're only
an artist studio of some sort, music, film, visual arts, comedy. I don't know, what do you do? Yeah, but I mean,
once again, like, even here you're like comedy.
I mean,
see, it's a thing
like,
where
how
people
do you
stand on stage and tell
yeah,
jokes.
like how do you got to do that at a nightclub or something?
No, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't. I have done shows at 10 in the morning. That's the thing. Even that is the idea that comedy happens in dark rooms at night full of people, full of drunks. And the minute you say that, there's certain people who go like, that doesn't sound like fun. Yeah, it's fine. Just go down those dark stairs in the back of that basement. There's a microphone and a spotlight, and you'll be surrounded by drunk people. That's not everybody's idea of a good time. And so I know artists here in the Bay Area, comedians. I will refer to them as artists in this tent because this is the artist tent.
Yeah.
Outside, I'll stop calling them artists. But like that, the minute you put the idea of that's how comedy is done, a lot of people go, I'm not gonna. I don't want to do that, and then they think I don't want to do comedy.
Yeah.
Which you're like, no, you don't want to do that. And so I think it's the idea of like we have to. And the people who are in the idea of funding the arts have to come up with creative ways to bring in new people who are being frozen out by the traditional means of performance.
Yeah. And so one way to do that besides the housing is some sort of art centers that have the daycare in them, that's what it's paid for. And, and people can, and even just knowing that it exists, even if you're somebody that doesn't have kids yet, or isn't planning on having kids, it gives you a different idea of who the community of artists are and what you can do with your life, right?
Right now there's sort of the current thing in comedy is after Hannah Gadsby's Netflix special, Nanette, she's a queer woman from Tasmania, over in that side of the world, Australia. I don't say Australia, but Tasmania, but Australian. And her special was very much a sort of a discussion about what is comedy and how comedy is in the world and the harmful ways which traditional mainstream comedy takes up space. And there's all this talk about, is this post-comedy? Are we now on another side? Now are we through comedy? Because this is now what new comedy is? It's like, no. We're just expanding the idea of what comedy can be. And I think, I feel like the problem is that anytime things exist outside of the mainstream definition of the thing, people think it's not the thing anymore. As opposed to, no, it's just opening the idea of what the thing can be.
And I think going off of stealing your point about how,
sampling, you're sampling my point.
Yeah, how changing how people can perform and consume this art can also change what people think that their art is for, right? And how people start creating it, what they think they can do with their art, right? Because I come from a background of way back in the day organizing and stuff like that, I've had an idea of how I would like my art to be consumed and what I would like people to do with the ideas, in a perfect world or something like that. Some people we're given a limited idea of what our art can do, of how our art, and part of that is how it's consumed, how it's, and where we make it, how we make it. And so I think through some of these choices we can have art that's more connected to the movements that are happening in the world. We can have people that are involved with creating movements hone their skills and get better at making that art. Create areas that have cohorts in places of artists that are helping each other get better in places where it normally wouldn't. And I think that having an idea of, without some of this art making, people try to do whatever they think the industry wants, right? So you have so many people that could have made something amazing that are, if they're not figuring out what font will help sell cereal, they are just
Comic Sans.
They're just doing whatever they think will get them on. They're doing these things that will, and so they're making they're writing the films, they're making the songs that they can get someone else to put out. Or they can, and so if we want to create this other thing, I think, specific funding around people that want to connect their work to the movements that people have questions about, that the world is thinking about, is going to be really, really important. But it's not going to be able to just be identifying the artists as they exist right now. That's part of it. But creating that platform for folks to come out there, because the first thing that's going to happen is the same thing that's going to happen with us. We're like, we want to make something that has to do with the movement, and you end up with, like, for us, it was like a pamphlet on tape. And not as effective as what we created after figuring it out, you know? And so these are things where we have to work and make them more effective, and we need to have the physical spaces and the bills paid for that.
Yes, the bills paid is important. I think the other thing I think is that the reason why you're here, one of the reasons you're here, and I'm just going to put this on you because I believe it to be true, the reason that I'm here today is because we also both clearly had a natural disrespect of the genre we were sort of in that I am a comedian, but this thing that I'm doing isn't working for me, so let me go try to find a theater in downtown San Francisco and do something there. Or you, the same thing, like I know people identify me as a rapper, but also I'm gonna write a film. So there's whereas some people when they're in their genre just feel like I have to, like you said, I gotta do the thing that works here, even if it doesn't work for me. And I think that some of that is funders creating spaces for you to learn how to disrespect your genre. Because I know one of the big reasons I'm here is because at some point, Faviana and or Jeff Chang saw me somewhere and was like, he could be something if we invited him to Culture Strike and took him to the border and showed him about what life is like down there. And I was like, and because I was like, okay, nobody else is inviting me places. And I go down there and I see that and I go, my mind is all blown. And then later, because I'm naturally disrespecting my genre, I'm in a meeting at CNN going, do you want to host a show that is about travel around the country? Sure, that's not, even though no comedian has done that before. And then I go, eventually, season 3, I was like, Faviana, come on my show so we can talk about the border again. You know what I mean? So it's the idea of like, we have to encourage people to be disrespectful of their genres because that's how you create new things you haven't seen before, you know? But I think, and we gotta wrap it up, but I think the thing that's important is like the process you went through to get to where you are right now, that's not there's no pamphlet somebody can get to show them how to do that. There's not a seminar, because you don't have time to teach it, about how to get here in this chair. There's no pamphlet or seminar about how do you go from stand-up comedian, 7 minutes on Sundays at the Punchline to here, because we sort of had to do it and figure it out. And I think that the job of people who are funders is to look at careers like ours and Faviana's and go, how do we show people how to replicate that in some way so we can create 100 Favies or 100 Boots or 100 Kamau, 97 Kamaus. But I still got more time. The last thing I'll ask you is, what do you want these people to take with them? We get one, you got a minute. So you can't take up so what do you need to tell these people to take with them?
The same thing that for me has to drive me as an artist is that if you don't do it, nobody's gonna do it. Like, it's not just something that you can hope will get better and people will start funding this or do that. This is where it happens. This is like the beginning of a bunch of other artists, you know, ability to create things that matter. And it's not just an idea. You got to figure out how to do it and work with folks to find the artists and to make the spaces. So.
Go see art that you would normally see to find those new voices. Thank you, everybody. I've been W. Kamau Bell. This is Boots Riley. Faviana Rodriguez.
Thank you.
Vote November 6th.